Hello, my friend, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk to you about something that I think is really something that goes overlooked, but is really important to getting your songs and your productions sounding really good, and that is playing bass. Now, my background as a musician, just to give you a little bit of the backstory, I got started playing music by first playing the bass. And the funny story is, it was kind of a sibling rivalry thing where my brother had started learning how to play the guitar, and I wanted, my older brother, by the way, and I wanted to sort of copy him and follow in his footsteps because I kind of looked up to him. But I didn't want to do it so obviously and completely be following in his footsteps. So I decided to pick up the bass instead of the guitar because it was kind of similar, but not exactly the same thing. And then my parents bought me a starter pack, like one of those Squire P bass type deals, and I did one lesson, and then I'd put it down and just never played. And then eventually he kind of kicked me and pushed me in the butt and was just trying to get me to play, and nothing was really working until one day. I still distinctly remember this day. It's the day that changed everything for me. My best friend Nick came over after school had let out for summer. It was the last day of school of 7th grade, believe it or not. I can still remember that far back. And Nick was a guitar player and still is, actually. And so he came over and brought his guitar, and he started playing a song that was basically 3 chords, and he taught me what a chord progression was, and just said, hey, here's how you play along on the bass with what I'm playing on the guitar. It's G, C, D, and then we repeat. And then he showed me the notes on the bass. And I didn't understand the theory. I didn't understand what a chord progression was. I didn't understand how it all connected, and that I was playing the root notes of these chords. And but it worked. And on an intuitive gut level, I felt like, hey, I'm playing along with what someone else is doing. We're making music. And that's what it's all about, right? And so that moment, everything just clicked. And then from that day forward, no one ever had to tell me again to pick up that bass and play it. And I've now just been a musician ever since. And now it's like my life's calling, I guess, my passion, right? But enough about me. All of that to say is that I know a thing or two when it comes to playing bass. I've been playing now for, let's see, that was when I was 13 years old. I'm about to turn 27, so I've been playing the bass for 14 years. But probably you guys out there who are producing your own tracks, a lot of you might be bass players, but a lot of you might not be, right? So that means that we're going to have to write our own bass lines, and we're going to have to make them in the box. We may not have a bass guitar. I have a bass, but for today's video, the whole approach that we're going to be taking is showing you some tips. I have 3 tips, actually. 3? See 3? To be exact. I have 3 tips that I'm going to show you on how to start writing some bass lines and how to make them just good, and that they're going to fit your song and make those productions sound nice and solid and tight and professional. Those 3 tips are as follows, and then we're going to jump onto the computer and I'm going to show you some concrete examples. These tips are not rocket science. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm just giving you some ideas that are tried and true methods that have just worked for me over the years. And they're going to help contribute to making your song just sound like it's glued together, because the bass is not the star of the show. 3 tips for you. 1, follow the kick drum. This is super important because the drums set the tone. The drums, when it comes to the drums and bass relationship, drums are the leader and bass is sensing and responding to what's happening there. 2, don't overplay. Keep it simple more often than not. You're going to minimize your chances of getting yourself into trouble. And then 3, when you do add embellishments or extra notes or little runs and fills and things like that, my tip is to add those towards the end of a measure, in that little in-between period that happens between the measure ending and the beginning of the next measure, because there's a space for something to happen. And that's commonly how I approach bass runs and fills and stuff like that, because that's when it's a good time to do it, because it's not going to be in the way of other things happening in the band most of the time. And I have a little bonus tip for you as well. And this is more of a production tip than it is a writing parts tip. But if you want to make your bass line stand out, add some distortion or some saturation. You'd be surprised how when you listen to the bass by itself and it's got distortion on it, it's going to sound distorted, right? It's going to sound like it's too much, it's overkill, it's a little too fuzzy. But then you unsolo it and you hear it in the context of the whole mix, and it actually just sounds good. It doesn't sound distorted, and it sounds like it's just adding to the whole ambiance of the whole mix, and the bass even sounds more distinct, not less. So a little bonus tip for you. So let's jump into the computer and let's just go over some examples of what I mean by these 3 tips. All right, now that we are inside Ableton, I'm just going to show you what I've started here really quick. I've built a very simple and predictable drum beat and a chord progression on a piano, so it's very simple, and it sounds something like this. Okay, and I've just got it looped up here. I've got the metronome on. Kind of helps me when I'm recording parts. So this is all MIDI tracks here, all MIDI notes on the grid here. So the first, again, there's 3 tips here that we're going to cover really quickly here. And the first tip is follow the kick drum. So I've got my bass loaded up here. I love this plugin called Moto Bass by IK Multimedia. I use IK Multimedia stuff for everything because I bought their bundle one time, and that was pretty much all I needed to buy for a long time. But you don't have to have this plugin. This is just, I like it because it sounds good. It sounds like a real electric bass. You know, you could just as easily just use something stock that comes with your DAW, for example. This could just as easily, I'll show you very quickly here. I'll duplicate the track. Could just as easily be Ableton's stock bass here, instrument rack bass. I really like this one called Hip Hop Sub Bass. And that would work just as well. But we're going to stick with this one because I enjoy it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to play a bass line with whole notes, holding out for the entire measure. But we're going to follow the kick drum. So in order to do that, I am going to pull up the MIDI notes that are on this grid for the drums. And I'm going to, this C1 here is the kick drum. So I'm going to visually just track that as I'm going. Normally I'd be listening because I'd have an electric bass in my hands. Like if you're in a live situation, you are playing by feel, but because we're in the studio, we have a little bit of an advantage here, so we may as well use it. We're on the keys and we're recording MIDI notes, and we have the ability to actually look at the real notes that the drummer's playing too, so might as well, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Now, because I'm not the best keys player, these were not perfectly in time, but we have the ability to quantize, or we can very simply just drag them into place by visually looking at them and how they align here. So I'm going to fold this so we only see these notes. And we're going to click this little button here. That's going to allow us to hear the notes as we play them. So let's get everything in time here. That goes there. And then this note wants to align with this note here. So let's see. Right. Actually, they're right over here. So I was a little bit ahead of myself. But that happens to be off time as well. Right there, 2.4.3. And then we'll tighten it up so that it's very tight and precise. And now we'll go over here. That one was close. That one was not. That's good. That goes right on the 5 at the beginning of the next measure. That tightens up. This aligns with 5.4.3. This goes to the beginning of measure 6. And I'm just doing this manually just to kind of demonstrate the idea. So now check it out. Thanks to the magic of MIDI, we can have perfectly in time bass notes. Here's a little bonus tip. To add some flavor, you can mess around with the length of how long these notes are sustained for. So watch this. Let's just say I make it much shorter. So maybe that's a little bit too short, but it's something that you can play with and just have fun with. Like, let's just say you leave a gap of, you see there's 2 little slots right there. So there's some creative silence right there, as opposed to if you only left one little block. Neither of those is right or wrong. It's just a matter of preference. I kind of like it with the little bit of gap. So that's the tip number 1. Follow the kick drum. Now, tip number 2 has a lot to do with tip number 1, following the kick drum. Tip number 2 is don't overplay. Keep things simple. And that's kind of what we've done here is we've kept things very simple. We've literally only used, essentially whole notes, and we're only breaking it up every so often. The only breakup that's happening is when there is 2 kick hits happening, we're breaking up the note so that we have the note hit accenting at the same time that the kick drum is, right? So, But you actually could just leave it. But I think it sounds more plain and it sounds less rhythmic when you don't have this. Because the piano is the instrument that's just sustaining out the chords. See? Very plain and simple, and that's the role that instrument's playing, and the bass is playing a different role. It's gluing itself with the kick drum. So keeping it simple, there is something that you could do to add a little bit of variation to this that would still keep things simple. And I would say take this, you could use any one of these notes to do this. I like to start the first note of this progression on a low bass note here. So like A sharp number 1. And then on the second note, if I was playing a real bass in a live situation, I might take this second note and play it an octave higher. So watch this. F sharp number 2. So check this out. creatively, you could let this kind of little pickup hit that's following the kick drum be back down at the F sharp 1, or you could keep it at the same octave as this note. I'd probably keep them together, but you don't have to. Okay, but another option would be to leave that note alone and take this one and bring this one down to, say, C1. Oh, I can't go that low because this is only a 4-string bass. But let's say I could go up to C3 if I wanted to go high. Oops, C sharp, rather. It all depends on the context. There's not a lot of context in this song yet because it's not really a song. It's just a piano and drums. We don't know if there's vocals yet or not. We don't know if this is a chorus. We don't know if this is just the verse. If it was just the verse, especially if it's the first verse, staying low is what I would recommend doing. As low as you can, because the bass is, people say holding down the low end, and practically what that means or what that looks like is basically you're just holding things together by playing in that lower register where other instruments can't go or don't sound as good when they're going, like a piano. And you are just that foundation that the rest of the song and the rest of the mix is being built on top of. So that does bring us to tip number 3, which is adding embellishments or fills towards the end of a measure if you're going to at all. Now, based on what I just said about context is key. In fact, context is everything. So you're going to want to exercise good judgment when you're writing bass parts as to whether or not a bass fill is necessary or actually helps or adds to the song that you're writing. So, you know, if this was the first verse of the song, it's too soon to be creating these bass parts that have these fancy embellishments. That might be something that you'll say for the chorus or at the end of the second verse that's going back into the chorus, or in a bridge or something that happens later in the song. Whereas in the beginning of the song is being introduced to the listener and you're trying to establish a mood, you're trying to establish an atmosphere, and you don't want to be distracting from that by writing bass parts that are essentially saying, oh, look at me, I'm here, the bass is here, I've arrived to the party. That's not the role of what the bass does. It's not meant to be this big thing that makes this grand entrance that's announcing its presence and trying to shine a spotlight on itself. That's what lead vocals are, or if it's an instrumental song, whatever instrument is playing, like the lead melody, it is kind of the star of the show. You know what I mean? So bass isn't playing that role. So use caution when you are going to do fills, but if you are going to, here's my tip. Write them towards the end of the measure, not at the beginning or in the middle, because there's a little bit of space that opens up between the last note in the chord progression at the end of a measure, and between that and the next measure where the first chord of the chord progression, bringing it back to the top, begins. I hope that made sense. I'll show you. You'll see what I mean here. So this chord progression is 4 chords, and I've looped it twice, so we have 8 bars basically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So let's just say at the end, let's write a fill at the end of the last measure, right over here. So, and again, we're not going to write a huge fancy fill, just something simple. So, picking it up. So I'm already hearing something like, all right, let's see. watch this. I'm going to draw it because I'm going to attempt to play it first. How about that? So I think it's going to start about there, and I'm going to add this plus sign here so I don't actually record over this mini. I'm just adding to it. There's another bonus tip for you. So starting from here. So that first note I played was wrong, but so I'll just bump it down right here, but watch this. That one too. So if you'll excuse my poor keys playing because I'm not a keys player, I will drag these notes into their appropriate slot to the nearest marker. Here is where sometimes you can just tell where the note needed to be because it'll be just forward or just back of the nearest like marker, and that's exactly what's happened here. Let's tighten up these notes so that they're not bleeding into each other. We don't want legato for bass per se. Sometimes maybe, but not this time. Let's play it. Now that's good, but this note's a little too short, so let's lengthen it. Almost. I think it's a little late. I think it's meant to happen right on the 5.2.3. One more time. Very close. Now we just need to take this note before it's being sustained for too long, so let's shorten it. Awesome. All right, so that's it. So let's play it from the very beginning. And there you have it. It's just a very simple fill. It's just a little run that utilizes, what are these, like eighth notes basically? Well, we have, yeah, pretty much. So, yeah, they're basically eighth notes. So, there you have it, folks. Just a few simple tips for you to write some bass lines. To recap, number one, follow the kick drum. Kick drum is king when it comes to the bass. The kick drum sets the tone, and you are locked in with that thing and following its cues. You take your cues, and you are marching to the beat of that drummer, quite literally. Tip number two is don't overplay. Keep things simple. It's okay to change things up once in a while and to not always play every note in the same octave register. And I showed you a little bit what that sounds like if you take the second or third note in the progression and jump it up to a higher octave. You can do that. That's still keeping things simple, but use discretion. You know, if you're in the beginning of the song, you might want to keep it lower, keep it solid, and then later in the song you might go up. And then number three, add some embellishments towards the end of the chord progression and at the end of the final chord, like at the end of the measure. That's when you're going to want to add your run because there's some space to incorporate it when it's not going to be stepping on other instruments' toes, metaphorically speaking. And here's the little bonus tip for you, and this is more production to help your bass parts stand out. And actually, we can do this right in the plugin. I don't need to reach for something else. But you could use something in your DAW. Let's see. Where can I add? Here we go. We're going to take a distortion pedal. And you might think, distortion on bass, watch this. I'm just going to go light with it and watch how it's going to come to life and just pop. It's subtle. Without it, I'll volume match it. Let's loop this. Without it, with it. Now this song is more naked right now because there aren't any other instruments surrounding this, but if you build out a full mix with a big production going on, and you've got other pads or other guitars or something else going on, and you add a touch of distortion, even more than what I just did, you're not going to tell that the bass is really that distorted. And even just with this little example here, the bass just sounded like it opened up a little more. It just sounded like more lively, and like the notes themselves just had more color. Without it, it just sounds very clean. I mean, it sounds good. It's crisp. But it's just a little bit more bland. You know, this adds some color and some flavor. And then, you know, you can take your own distortion plug-in or whatever you're going to use and dial it into taste. Start small, like start with small amounts and blend it in until you can hear it. And then I recommend once you start hearing the effect of it, dial it back just a little bit, and that'll be your sweet spot. So there you have it. 3 tips for writing bass lines for your songs, and a bonus tip about adding some distortion or some kind of saturation to your bass to make it pop more. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was helpful in some ways. And if you want to start writing music today, I have some goodies that I'd like to give you. I have some free samples that I've made. I made them from scratch all by myself to hand them to you to help you get started. And I use them in my productions. And there's over 40 of them, and they come in all the different keys and major keys of music. Basically, they're written to fit into. And I also have you'll also get access by signing up to get these samples. You'll have access to a private workshop that I've created. That's like a 4-part workshop that shows you how I would use my samples to create a production from scratch. And so that whole workshop is using the tool that I'm handing you to then turn around and actually make a song with it, just to show you that this is something that you can use. So I recommend you guys check that out. The link is going to be in the description to be able to sign up for that. In fact, we might even just have a pop-up in the video here for that as well, but it'll be in both places. Sign up, claim those samples, get started writing music today. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep going and writing some more music myself. So thanks guys for sticking with me. I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate you guys being my viewer and checking this out. If you have any questions, or you would like to leave any kind of comment, or if there's another thing that you'd like to know about that I can talk about in the future and go over in a video, let me know in the comments below. Tell me, what is it that you'd like to see in the future related to music production? What's tripping you up, or what's something that you need some further explanation on? You need to see it in action by someone else doing it in order for it to click. What is that thing? If you have an idea of what it is, leave it in the comments. I'll be checking them. And thanks a lot, guys. Next time.